Welcome to Module 11, and in this particular module we're going to talk a little bit about working with charts. All a chart is a visual representation of the data that you have selected. You can have a little bit of data and come up with many different charts related to that particular data because it's all based on the areas of that data that you have selected. Let's go over to Excel and I will show you how to create some super simple charts. Let's take a quick peek at how the exercise is set up before we start creating a few charts from this data. This is our company, Books and Beyond. It looks like they are tracking their quarterly sales report. If you notice, column A has each of the locations. Row 5 across has each of the quarters, and then look at column F. It looks like they totaled across, and row 10 at the bottom, they're actually totaling each of the quarters down. A couple things to remember about setting up the data if you're going to create charts from the data. You want to make sure that you do have row and column headings. Here are my row headings here, and here are my column headings here. What's going to happen is if you don't have row or column headings, when the chart is actually created, you won't know what the data actually represents. You'll see when we get our chart in that because you have these row and column headings, you will then have what we call axes in your chart. Charts are always based on what you have selected. You could have just one area selected and create some charts, or you might have different selections and create charts based on that. And we'll do a few of those so you'll get a feel for how this works. I want to start with a simple basic column chart. I'd like to chart each of my locations and quarters 1 through 4. I'm actually going to select the range A5 through E9. I want you to notice that I've actually selected the locations or the headings over here, and I've selected quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 here so that I can see those actually in my chart. I didn't select just the data. Now, a super quick way to create a basic column chart on its own sheet is on the keyboard. Use your F11 function key. I'm going to go ahead and do that now and hit F11, and now you'll see I have a basic column chart. When you look at this, you can see that each of the quarters, and at the bottom here you can see which countries are represented by the different colors. The big thing I want you to notice is that we had our data a second ago over here on this chart data sheet. And when you use F11 to put in a chart, notice that it gives it a name, chart 1, chart 2, chart 3, whichever one is next. You'll want to go ahead at some point and rename those sheets so you'll know what's on each sheet. Let me go back to the chart data sheet. That's an example of one selection. Let's do one where we have multiple selections. Let's say I'd like to only chart quarters 1 and 4. I'm going to select my first range being A5 through B9. Then I'm going to hold the Control key and I'm going to select the range E5 through E9. And now you'll see that these are two different selections. If I do the same thing, I'm going to hit my function key, which is F11. Notice now I have another chart sheet. Notice this one is chart 4 down here at the bottom. And notice I'm only tracking quarters 1 and 4 for each of my divisions here. I'm going to go ahead and rename these. I'm going to name this one, I'll just call them chart, and then I'll say quarters 1 and 4. And this first one here, I'll just call it chart, and then we'll call it all quarters. How's that sound? Chart, all QTRS. Now I know what's on each of my sheets. Let's take a quick look at this chart and get some terminology. I want you to notice first of all that these are my axes. You have your x-axis and your y-axis, and here's how you know the difference. Your y-axis goes up and down this way in this case. Y always represents the values. You can see the values here on the left. Across this way are my categories. Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. X always represents your categories. Y represents values and X represents categories. You can have charts where it might be reversed, where the values may be across the bottom and you might have your categories up. Then that would be reversed. Sometimes you might have a chart with a little 3D effect, If it does, you'll have a little 3D right in the corner here, and that would be what we call your z-axis. A pie chart, which is round, would have no axes. So just know that term when we're talking about charts. Another term to be familiar with is what we call the legend. So where it says down at the bottom, each of the divisions, Australia, Germany, Canada, Great Britain, that's the legend. You might have your legend appear on the right sometimes. You might not have one at all. There's just different ways you can make this appear. In the chart itself, you're going to see these lines here, which we call grid lines. And you'll notice that I clicked on them. And when you select a grid line, they all have these little dots on the ends. That's how you know they're selected, so that if I didn't want them for some reason, I could just hit delete on my keyboard. The area that would be behind the grid lines, which is actually behind each of these bars here, is what we call the plot area. And then the grid lines would actually sit on top of the plot area, and then these bars would sit on top of that. So you actually have like 3 layers when you're talking about charts. This one actually has a title at the top as well, which you could type over that. If you wanted to give it a title and just call it whatever you like, you could. Let me go back to the chart data sheet. Those were 2 examples of column charts that are on separate sheets. Let me give you an example now of what we call an embedded chart. An embedded chart appears on the same sheet as your data. Let's say that I only wanted to chart my locations. I'll then hold the control key and come over and get my totals. Just the locations and the totals is all I want to chart. This time I'm not going to use my F11 key. F11 will always give you a column chart, and it will always be on a separate sheet. The way you would actually put in a chart, if you go up to the Insert tab, you're going to notice that you have a whole area here where you have all kinds of charts you can put in. And if you notice, one of these looks like a pie chart right here. And let's say I'd like to put in this one right here, which is a 3-dimensional pie chart. You'll notice that now the chart is actually on top of the data. It's on the same sheet. That's called an embedded chart. You'll notice that it's really big and it's on top of my data. I can actually do a couple things. I can change the size by grabbing one of these circles on the edges. Those are called control handles. If you don't see those, it might be because you're clicked back in your data. Just click back in the chart itself and now they'll pop up. See how if I grab one of these, I can drag down like this and change the size of the chart? And that would just be up to you, whatever size you want the chart to be. You can also move this chart. Notice I can click right in the middle here in this white area and click and drag and maybe move it down here like this. And then if I wanted, of course, the size to maybe line up at the edge of my column F there, I could do that. So you can see that now I have my data here and I have my chart here. Charts and data sheets are linked. That means if I change the data here, it'll change the chart. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I change Australia's Q3, and let's say I change it to 10,000. What I want you to notice is that this piece of the pie actually changed. Look at that. And if I flip over to the chart all quarters, you'll notice that now this bar actually reflects the new value. If I look at quarters 1 and 4, you'll notice the same thing. And then back to chart data over here. Now let's say I put it back and I make it 3,000. I want you to watch that blue piece of the pie down there. It's going to change, and now you'll see it reflects the 3,000, and these will as well when I go back and look at these. When you're printing your chart, if you're on a sheet that has the data and the chart, if you're just clicked on the chart itself, you're going to print just the chart. You won't print the data. If you'd like to print both the data and the chart, make sure you're clicked out to the side and then you'll be able to print them both. I'll go ahead and do a print preview and just show you. I'm going to File, Print. And now you'll see that you're printing both the chart and the data like I said. What I want to do now is take you over into section 2 because there are different types of charts that you can have. We've looked at column charts and a pie chart already, but there are several different ones. Let's go ahead and go over to section 2 and I will talk to you about the different types of charts you can put in Excel.